Have you ever killed another human being? Some will say it wasn't a human being yet, that it was just a zygote or fetus, but I killed my unborn daughter. I was 12, and she was the product of rape. At the time, there was no way I could have a safe legal abortion, and I didn't want my family to know I had been raped. I was 12 and scared, 12 and desperate, 12 and felt all alone in the world. If my father found out what that boy did to me, I would endanger my life, and my father would see me as tainted, and there'd be no reason for him to not rape me as well. I was 12 and I knew that a fall down the stairs could cause me to lose a pregnancy. There was also a chance it could kill me, but it was better than enduring another rape. I fell down a long string of concrete steps, the pain intense, and when I reached the bottom I was bleeding bad, but my body seemed just bruised and scraped up. I buried this painful secret down until I was 16. I kept secret the attack and the murder of my baby until I was 16. My father found out the truth, and true to my fear, he tried to have his way with me. I found out a few years ago that after 10 years of trying to get pregnant that I'm now barren, that the combination of the rape and my attempt to lose the baby has rendered me sterile. I killed my only chance to be a mother. I killed my baby. I stand behind any woman to do what is right for her. I stand behind a woman having a safe abortion so she never has to put her life on the line only to find she destroyed her future in a moment of being desperate. Going anonymous for obvious reasons. Yes, I have taken another man's life, and I would do it again in the same circumstance. A few years ago I was home with my girlfriend. It was a lovely brisk winter day outside. I had a random day off work due to some power problems at the office, important for what happened next. About 10 a.m. or so my girlfriend heard what sounded like someone moving around in our basement. Being that I live alone, she asked me if I had a friend over or a dog downstairs. Concerned, I grabbed my handgun. I am legally licensed in my state to carry and own this firearm out of my dresser and went to investigate. In my basement was a man rifling through my desk and office filing cabinets. I positioned myself behind a wall and ordered him to turn around and get on the ground, that I was armed, and for him to show me his hands. I think I caught him off guard as he turned his head, saw me there with my gun, and turned towards me and fired at me with a handgun he had in his other hand, or he had placed on the desk. The details are a little hazy. I shot him 3 times in the chest, which is what a 9mm took for him to drop to the ground. I moved his pistol with my foot away from his body and waited for the police to arrive, as my girlfriend had taken the initiative to call them. Turns out he was wanted for assault with a deadly weapon and was suspected in other crimes. Do I regret having to take this man's life? Sure. But I would do it again today if placed in the same situation. I was once homeless and living in Los Angeles. I met a guy named Eli who had arrived in LA a little before I had, with just the clothes on his back. Our days would be filled with playing guitar, skateboarding and biking around North Hollywood, smoking weed, and popping prescription pills. We talked about everything under the sun, including how depressed we both were. He would talk about how we were destined to become friends, and how I changed the trajectory of his life for the better. He would share his food with me when I was starving and I with him. We would debate about everything under the sun. After a while I made some money to head back to the East Coast. He said he was going to go to community college. As soon as I landed on the East Coast, it was out of sight, out of mind for the both of us. I do this a lot with people. As an introvert who suffered a lot of trauma growing up, I can manage to not speak to someone close to me for months or even years. People come in and out of my life without my concern. So there I am, in Boston getting my life together. Around 5 months later I check his Facebook to find out that he hung himself. After doing some research, I learned that he wrote a letter stating that he couldn't go on without the aid of prescription pills and marijuana. All he needed was a call. I know I'm not directly responsible, but how oblivious could I have been to my friend's needs when he basically saved my life in LA? I will never forgive myself. Yes. October the 7th, 2007. I was driving home from a job interview and lost braking power in my truck coming up to an intersection. At the same time, an SUV was also driving through that intersection. I remember trying to steer around the car, all the while frantically trying to stop, not much else. When I came to, I reached up to shut my truck off, and realized the steering column was in my lap. I brushed broken glass off of myself, shredding my hands. I tried to open the door of my pickup, impossible. I crawled my way out the passenger window, putting weight on my left leg, it crumpled. I shattered the bones. I crumpled to the ground. Then I saw the SUV upside down and on fire. People were starting to show up, and I remember crawling toward the burning car and hearing screams. The driver of the car, an elderly man, was trapped inside of his car. People kept pulling me back away from it, but I kept pulling myself forward. I wanted to help the man. This went on for what seemed like hours, but in reality was only a few minutes. The paramedics arrived and strapped me down. That was the first time in all of this that I felt pain. The screaming continued for a few more minutes while I was being treated in the ambulance. Then it stopped completely. It wasn't until later that I found out that the other driver had died. He burned to death. A Michigan state trooper came into my hospital room and asked for a PBT, which I gave, as well as a blood test. I was eventually charged with negligent homicide, which was dropped after documents from the brake repair shop I took the truck to a week before the accident showed that I had noticed a brake problem and taken it to be fixed. I withdrew from everyone for a long time. Even though the accident was just that, an accident, I still felt responsible. I still do. Had I waited 10 more seconds, or left 10 seconds earlier, that man wouldn't have burned to death. Had I went to a different brake shop, he would have went home to his family. Even 10 years later, I still have nightmares about it. I still wake up screaming. I will live with this guilt every day for the rest of my life. Yes, I have. In the early 90s, my then girlfriend and I worked together in a small retail shop. The shop was open on Thursdays, 9 p.m., closing. Having closed up, we were walking back to her nearby home, taking a shortcut through a small but fairly well-lighted park. We became aware that someone was following us and chose to ignore the person while walking a bit more quickly. What happened next is, in my memory, somewhat hazy in some parts, but sharply clear in others. The guy charged at us, pushed me aside and took my girlfriend to ground with a knife in hand, saying something like, "I want your girl, go away or I'll kill her and you." From this on comes the hazy part. Not thinking much, I apparently tackled him off my girlfriend, yelling for her to get help. We tussled back and forth with him ending up on top of me with his knife. I had one arm free, and this I do remember clearly, thrusting my arm, palm open, upward into his nose, and he fell backward off me. Next cognizant memories were hearing, "I think this guy is dead and get the ambos here ASAP." I thought they were talking about me. No. The blow that I had inflicted to the guy had driven his nasal bones into his brain and it had killed him. Police investigations, questioning and a coroner's inquest followed. There was a witness to the scene who accurately described what they saw. I was exonerated completely of any crime. Nonetheless, I felt compelled to find out more about our assailant that night and the man I had killed. It ended up not being a pretty story. I will never get over the fact that I have killed a fellow human being, whatever the circumstance. Years on, I still sometimes wake up at night wondering if I could have done something different. Oh boy, my answer is maybe. I was in my 20s in Nick. I lived in a walk-up on 79th Street and lived with my sister in a studio. She was dating a young brown belt guy who also owned a comedy club and therefore was friendly with many police officers in his precinct. He gave us, for protection, a can of police mace, a police billy club, a taser and a switchblade he'd found somewhere. I was quite grateful. The one night I was alone in our apt, I was dreaming that a man's arm was coming in through my window on the fire escape. I woke up scared to death and jumped out of my skin as it was not a man's arm. It was a man's head on his way into my studio bedroom, about 5 feet from my pillow. I looked at my 4 weapons, chose the billy club for expedience, and started slamming his head while cursing like a sailor. "Come in and die, mother F. Come in and F and die. POW, POW, POW," again and again on his head. He fell back. I lived on the 4th floor. I know he went over the fire escape and I'm pretty sure he fell down 4 flights. He had 2-3 friends with him because when I shut my window with no lock on it, I heard them screaming. Imagine. What was their plan for me? It was 4 a.m. I couldn't call the police because I just played at a nightclub. I was a saxophone player and my little studio smelled of weed really bad. I was afraid of the police coming, seeing I had no weapons, smelling the weed all over, and then asking if I knew anything about a body flying 4 flights over the fire escape. No one ever came. No police came around asking questions either. Is it possible to have your head smashed several times and fly down 4 flights and live? Only God knows. Believe it or not, I was so stoned I went right back to sleep. I figured coming into my act looked and sounded painful, and will just get you thrown down 4 flights. It was unbelievable what came out of my mouth before he fell back. Bottom line, I don't know if I've ever killed a man, but I'm sure I hurt one bad. A woman presumed to be a drug overdose was brought into the emergency department. Report given stated that patient was found unresponsive, shallow respirations, breathing 8 times a minute. After being given Narcan, an opiate antidote, the patient had shown signs of reversal with improvement in respiratory status, though she still had not regained consciousness. The physician ordered another dose of Narcan intravenously. Narcan is a drug I had administered many times in my career as an emergency room nurse. I gave the ordered dose without any reservations, especially since she had received a dose en route that improved her condition without any complications. Upon administration, the patient sat straight up, terrified, and said, "What did you just do to me?" Then she collapsed back onto the bed in full cardiac arrest. Death is a rare side effect of Narcan administration. 1. We attempted to resuscitate her, but it was in vain. She died as a result of the medication sending her into acute narcotic withdrawal. Never in a million years did I foresee her dying. In nursing school we are taught that the possibility of accidentally causing a death exists. One just assumes that it will not happen to them. Since that night, I have never taken a medication for granted again. The event was investigated by a root cause analysis committee, standard procedure, and I was cleared of any wrongdoing. The physician was also cleared in the same investigation. Being cleared of wrongdoing offers little comfort to the person who pushed the drug that caused her death. Going back to work and giving medications again has been the hardest part. It gives one a new respect for medications as well as life. I'll give you the short story as it's still very touchy for me to discuss, going anonymous for obvious reasons. I was 15 years old. A friend of mine and his little sister had gone to a local pizza place. She was only 6 years old. We ate and then left, and had roughly 8 blocks to walk. We walked 4 or 5 blocks and then it happened. I was crossing the street, her hand in mine, and we were both hit with a SUV from behind. She was in the middle of the vehicle while I was hit by the very corner. She was killed instantly while I was thrown to the side of the vehicle. All that I seem to remember is my friend screaming hysterically and slapping his hands on the ground next to his sister. I rendered aid for as long as I could, switching on from caring for her, then standing and walking away crying hysterically. The driver was a young female and she silently sat and wept on the curb. The police showed up after a few minutes and separated us from her body. He never blamed me, but I always blamed myself. I try so hard to remember whether I looked both ways, but I'm positive I didn't. I was cleared of any wrongdoing, but I know I caused her death deep down. It's a struggle to cope knowing you took someone's life, whether directly or indirectly. Since then, my friend has moved in with me, gotten off probation and turned his life around. We occasionally talk about his sister and he never once blamed me. I'm slowly learning not to blame myself. I am still recovering from a broken pelvis, a few herniated discs and a torn ankle. Life does move on, however slowly. Yes, I was 19. I was sitting in my friend's garage, waiting for the waves to pick up. It was about 11 a.m. and all of a sudden we hear a scream. We look up and see my friend's neighbor go running across the driveway. Naked. She was 11. We kinda put together what she was saying. That her brother was locked up in the other neighbor's garage and their 27-year-old partially retarded son was touching them. We bust the garage door open and I saw what I hope to God nobody ever has to see. A 5-year-old little boy on the floor with so fucking much blood running out of his ass. And the piece of shit that was molesting him standing there with a smile on his face. I beat that piece of shit to death. I have never been filled with that much anger and fear since that day. The guy I killed was black. The kid's parents did not want them used in a trial, so I was on my own. A racially motivated murder. First trial mistrial. New DA rolls in and offers me 15 YRS. You see, he knew that molester raped kids in his own family. I could take up 100 pages telling my story. I did 23 YRS on that 15-year deal. Hooked up with the white supremacist prison gang. I don't know what you're searching for. How it felt to see the life leave him. Any remorse? Would I don't again knowing the circumstances? All I know is I gave up a large portion of my life so no kid would ever have to feel that piece of shit breathing on their neck when he's raping them. Yes, I have killed a man. It was 10:03 p.m. and I was driving on a 4-lane busy road. I was on the eastbound side. In side lane, I try to stay away from sidewalk side because at any time someone might run across from a very active tavern. I was doing about 30 miles per hour. My attention noticed two men standing on the right side waiting to run across the street. Suddenly I see the headlight of another car dip down and I see a man stand in front of that car with his hands on the hood. That car nearly hit him. As I start to slow down, he suddenly jumps in front of my car and I hit him with my driver's side front fender. I always remember the thud, crash sound of his face hitting my windshield right in my face and the glass flying. I jumped out and ran over to assist him but no response. The police arrived and gave me a breath test and I had no alcohol in me. He was very intoxicated. Two security guards ran over and told me that he was running away from a fight and that they saw him jump in front of my car and confirmed that I wasn't speeding. 4 months after the accident I went into post-traumatic shock and always saw his face when I closed my eyes. I could not sleep. After 2 months I had lost 45 pounds, didn't get out of bed, didn't walk, talk, eat, pee, poop, nothing goes in so nothing comes out. All I thought of was suicide, every minute of every day. 2 months later I was admitted in a FISC department in a hospital for 30 days. The doctors spoke to me 4 times a day. We drank decaf coffee. We made puzzles. We colored in coloring books, etc. When I left the hospital I still was nearly the same as when I went in, but I did start to eat some food. The meds they gave me made me paranoid about everyone and everything. I trusted or spoke to no one at all. I just sat and stared at the TV. Soon my house was sold. My business closed. My sons who live in my 3-family house were forced to move out with their wives and kids. 2 years later I walked to check out a lifeguard job within walking distance. I still wasn't driving, and after working there I saw that people liked me, laughed, talked to me, and slowly I began evolution, become live again. It's been 8 years since that life-changing night. My life totally changed for the worse and I will never really be happy and a together family again. He was an illegal person. I pay for his mistake every day for the rest of my life. For 2 years I pray to die every night. Yes, I have, and I am not ashamed of it, and I will do it again if my family is ever threatened. Here's the story. I was once a very fun-loving guy, a guy who actually loved his family and loved living his life. Life was going great. I had a lovely sister who was my faith, my best friend, my God. Our life was great. Our parents worked hard and were very successful, and they taught us the value of life. They taught us to give back to the society. I was just 18 and crazy head, nice cars around me, monthly vacations and whatnot. My sister, she was an angel. She was always ready to help people. She helped the poor. She provided good education to the poor and underprivileged. Finally, the most important day of her life. She was getting married to the person whom she knew since she was 14. All went well. She was 8 months pregnant. Everyone was excited, and then one day I get a call from her husband that she was rushed to hospital and he sounded tensed. I was chilled as I was sure the newborn is on its way. All hell broke loose. She was shot 5 times by some unknown gangsters. I didn't know what just happened. My soul just died right there. I called few people, and down the time I was told she was shot because she was about to expose some land mafia. The legal system of my country made it worse for us to get justice, and that's when I decided to take things in my own hand. I brought justice to my sister and I don't have any guilt in me. Yeah, but it was purely an accident. Kinda. I lived on a sailboat back at the turn of the millennia. It was about 2002 and I sailed solo across the Pacific and ended up in the Marquesas Islands. I had been at sea alone for 33 days and was literally in tears at the sight of land in the exact place I had hoped to see it. So I get to shore and this ancient Land Rover pulls up to a beach and this guy jumps out incredibly excited to see me. He proudly tells me he is the only guy on the island with a taxi license and a car. I'm confused at this point because there doesn't seem to be any roads on the island except for a bit of a dirt track up to a small village. Anyhow, I've been at sea for a month and respectfully decline his offer for taxi as I really need to stretch my legs. This poor guy practically starts to weep and tells me he has never had a customer before and would really like to drive me to the village. So out of the sheer strangeness of the situation I agree to be taxied the couple of kilometers. Upon arrival in the village, the guy is practically strutting like a peacock. He is so damn proud of delivering his first customer. He completely refuses offers of payment. This treatment continues for an entire week, and every day when I attempt to walk from the beach to the village, he pulls up and gives me a lift. He never wants money and just seems to revel in the fact he's doing something productive. At the end of the week, I decide it's about time to leave this lovely island. So I get a case of Heineken from my ship stores, and when he picks me up this time, I insist that he take the beer as a gift to say thanks for everything. This dude is so happy he can't stop smiling, friends for life sort of shit. That night he drinks the entire case of beer, all 24 cans, and drives his Land Rover off a 150 meters cliff and into the ocean. Yes, but who is really at fault is divided. I was driving home one day in 2013 along a busy main street. I turned onto a road that had a notorious blind spot, and out of nowhere, I saw a little old lady. It was too late to hit the brakes, and I pinned her against the driver's side door. People who saw the accident came running and calling 911 while I was sitting there, stunned and horrified. Ambulance and police arrived, but the old lady was pronounced dead at the scene. The police took my information and witness accounts. The police didn't place any blame on me since the old lady was in a no parking spot. A few days later, a police officer came and gave me information on the old lady's family. I went to her house, where her 2 children, a son and a daughter, and their respective spouses were there, sorting out some things. Once they saw me, I broke down and expressed how sorry I was for killing their mother. They brought me inside and said that it wasn't my fault. They explained that their mother was nearsighted and was suffering from severe dementia. Her license had been taken away just one day before, and her children were in the process of moving her to an assisted living facility. They were also planning on selling her cars after she moved into the assisted living, but somehow on that day, she decided to go for a drive. They took full responsibility because they didn't hide the car keys properly, and she somehow managed to find them. To this day, I still feel saddened that a poor old lady decided to go for a drive and not realize what she was doing was wrong. So, who do you think is at fault? I know a lot of people say it wasn't my fault, but I still feel the guilt of killing an innocent person. I've never taken a life of a living thing except a few insects directly. But I'm afraid my recklessness might have led to one of my friend's sister's death. My friend's sister, let's call her Jane, was diagnosed with type B diabetes when she was 3, and she was 13 when this happened. As we were talking, my friend, out of the blue, asked me if it was a warning sign that one of Jane's friends had inflicted some wounds on her arms. My own sister had done that once, when she was 13, because the love of her life had broken up with her teenage crap. But the wounds she inflicted on her arms were very shallow, because they hurt, she had said. I confronted her about how unhealthy and unnecessary it was what she did. She was embarrassed and convinced that it was stupid. I assumed the situation was something like that, so I brushed the situation off, saying that teenagers nowadays do such no-brain stuff, and it was probably nothing. I wish I had dug in more. I wish I had asked her how serious the wounds were. I wish she'd told me she was Jane and not her friend. A week later, after this conversation, my friend found Jane's lifeless body at home. It has been 3 years since, and not a day passed that I did not regret telling my friend to be careful and seek for psychiatric help. Yes, back in my 20s I was into hiking and camping. Though I usually went with a partner or a group, this time I went alone. I'd never been afraid in the wilderness, and though I was a smallish woman, I never felt vulnerable. It was a 5-6 day hike, and everything's going well. It was in the fall and the trails were pretty empty. On my last day, I'd decided to set up camp instead of doing the last 2 or 3 miles to where my car was parked. I'd found a beautiful spot on a cliff but hadn't set up yet. Then I hear a voice. Hello. My heart stopped, and somehow I just knew trouble was coming. I went back around the corner and there was a fairly normal looking guy. Didn't look much like a backpacker. I basically told him there was no room for him to set up and he should move along. He's very polite and says fine. However, I need a band-aid. Would you happen to have an extra? I say sure. As I'm squatting down to open my pack, with my back turned to him, he grabs my ponytail and whips me back onto my butt. Though I still don't know exactly what happened, I managed to trip him up and get him off balance, and he fell over the edge of the cliff. Silence. I honestly thought I was about to have a heart attack. Once I was calm enough to act, I began looking for him. The cliff was about 100 into a field of massive boulders that dropped another couple hundred feet. couldn't find him, see him or hear him. I hiked a bit further with my binoculars trying to get a better sight line but couldn't find him. When I returned to my camp, I noticed he had a small backpack he'd leaned against some rocks. There was nothing in his pack that suggested camping. I believe he walked to that spot from the parking area where my car was, though there was no extra car when I got there. The only thing of interest was a journal, and wow, this guy had issues. He wrote about rape and how he wanted to do it but couldn't get up the courage. How he was looking for the perfect victim. Not sure what to do, I finally decided to grab my stuff and get to my car. I hid his pack in some rocks that'll never be found. I kind of became obsessed with figuring out who he was in the years to follow. The internet was just coming into use and I checked for about 20 years. Missing persons, etc. never found anything that might indicate his identity, and I'm pretty sure his body never been found. I never felt guilty over this incident. It was either him or me. I didn't go looking for trouble. He did. Most people would attest to this and say it wasn't my fault, or it wouldn't even be considered to be murder. But I wanted this baby. Despite my age at the time, I wanted him or her to be a part of my life until the day I vanished. I was 17 and a half and pregnant with a 3-month-old fetus. Thing was, I wasn't taking care of myself. And I denied and was denied any ask for help from my folks at home. I didn't eat, sleep, nor exercise very well. I didn't have a place to go either, so most days I'd spend in a car or crash at a friend's sofa. I sold weed and waited tables while going to school. I felt exhausted most of the time, and on top of that wouldn't have frequent bowel movements. My body was fucking me up. I never ever used any of the weed. Ever. One day I was feeling groggy, and decided to shower to sort of wake myself up. I entered a local 24-hour fitness center and got a free membership for 30 days. Good enough. I headed towards the locker room where all the shower stalls were. Nobody was around. It was 6 a.m. sharp. I got naked and stepped in. As I rinsed myself, I noticed a thin swirl of blood circling the drain in the shower. I wiped my spot with my hand to see if it was any darker. And it was, gradually. Blood kept coming out till I felt like I was peeing blood. Then, I noticed small bits of fleshy tissue mixing in the compound of bloody chunks. It just screamed miscarriage. I had to exit the shower and call for help, as I didn't have a phone. A kind lady called 911 for me, and I was silently tucked into an ambulance without making a scene. As I arrived to the hospital, they were scanning what was left in my uterus. Before, what was a crisp, clear image of a baby resting in a womb is now a giant grey blur. My heart was broken. Tears came pouring down my cheeks. It was all my fault. I was too reckless. To this day, I still wonder if I would have been a good mom. I still wonder what it could have been. I guess you could say so. Let me explain. My grandmother was in her mid-80s, doing very well, very smart, walked 3 miles a day, etc. when she hit a cancerous lump grow on the side of her throat, under her ear. She went through 2 years of chemo and radiation. To treat where they did required removal of her teeth, she had years before capped all her teeth and insertion of a feeding tube. She wasted away to nearly nothing and expressed many times she was ready to go, but my mom, who was an only child, would not hear of it. Eventually we noticed she would have difficulty getting around and become very confused. Testing showed that the tumor was now in her brain. She lost consciousness. Doctors offered my mom the option to do surgery as a last resort, but I was able to convince her to not do surgery, just let her be comfortable. They gave us a nice private room, and my mom and I stayed with her around the clock until she breathed her last. They had her on morphine, and I confess at any sign of her discomfort we gave her a hit. She passed peacefully with us both holding her hands and my mom telling a story. I would not have it any other way. I contrast this with my husband's grandmother, whose children stood around her hospital bed, crying, doing the rosary, and listening to his grandmother's moans and cries of pain that we younger folks could hear down the hall for hours. We asked if they would give her something for pain, and were told it was available, but they wanted her conscious for as long as possible. They selfishly let her suffer. If I could have lessened her pain, I would have happily done so, and I deep down hope those who selfishly let her suffer eventually find out what that was like. In my view, if they had things to say to her, they had plenty of time to say them before her final hours when she was in such pain. Yes, it was out of self-defense. The USA can be a scary place. One night as me and my wife were sleeping, we heard some shattered glass that woke us up. We quickly got off the bed as I grabbed my cell phone from my nightstand and tiptoed down the hall to our empty extra room. I kept my guns in the closet of that room, so I grabbed my Glock and loaded it up. I gave my wife my phone and told her to call 911. We can hear footsteps from the perpetrator downstairs, so it was quite obvious that it was his first time committing a crime. I walked to the top of the stairs and looked below as I saw the guy in dark clothes as one of the automatic lamps was on. He didn't have anything covering his face, but I didn't recognize him. That's when I pointed the gun at him and yelled, "Drop your weapon now!" He raised his hand with the gun in his possession and I shot him directly at his head. My wife came running out of the room screaming, "Baby!" Just a reaction as she thought something happened to me. She ran into my arms with tears running, and then the police showed up about a few minutes later. It took them about 4 to 5 hours to get the dead body out of our house, but neither of us wanted to stay home after that night. We packed up our things and slept in a hotel for a few weeks until I found a better location for our new house. Now we live in the middle of nowhere with our own private lake, about 20 acres, and about 100 wooded acres. We have no neighbors within 20 miles away from us. It's very secluded and quite amazing. No more subdivisions for us. When I was much younger, I caused serious injury to a sailor by accidentally causing him to be stabbed in the neck by a broken beer glass. Thankfully, he didn't die. Yet another night in my life that didn't quite go as planned. I was on a boating trip with my best friend and her relatives from Detroit. We were heading north to Tobermory and had docked for a few days where there was a great inn. As there were several boats in our little convoy, things were quite merry and the liquor was flowing. There was quite a buzz on the second day when we woke up to find a massive yacht moored off in the distance, complete with crew in white uniforms. At any rate, I ended up drinking and dancing with the first officer, and he offers to take me to the yacht and show me around. We leave the inn, in the pouring rain, with a bunch of other people and are very, very drunk. Someone thinks it's funny to push me in the pool in my heavy warm clothes. I'm wet, heavy and slippery. We carry on down the wooden dock where I slip and fall backwards into the speedboat, my date falling on top of me. It took me a good few minutes to realize that the tall beer glass I was holding was embedded in his neck. He was airlifted to Sudbury, the nearest hospital, and if it hadn't been for the quick thinking of his colleagues, the outcome would have been very different. When I was a younger man, I served in the US Navy and then the French Foreign Legion. After serving in those organized Western military and obtaining military skills that were in high demand as an exceptionally trained soldier, I traveled down the pipeline of the PMC, private military contractor. While growing up in Boston, Massachusetts, I met and became very close friends with a man I considered my closest friend and ally for many years, a bloke named Chucky Taylor, the son of dictator and war criminal Charles Taylor of the Republic of Liberia. After working in Croatia for several years, he offered me my first contract in Liberia, training the customs and border soldiers of the Republic of Liberia after his father assumed the presidency. After discovering my friend was a potential war criminal himself, I left Liberia and ended up working for several companies out of Dubai and South Africa. When it was still legal to be a PMC, I made the continent of Africa my home for 15 years. Business was good because of the multitude of civil wars and rebellions that were taking place. I always contracted with the legally elected governments that were recognized by the UN, ICAMOG, ICAOWAS or OAU. I never contracted to associate with rebel or anti-government troops even though they offered to pay in hard currency. My idea of a white-faced American killing African rebels for diamonds or gold was against all my principles and would not look good on CNN. Training government soldiers in the ways of asymmetrical warfare and the use of modern weapons was, in my opinion, an honorable endeavor. I considered my experiences were both morally and economically profitable. I have no guilt from my past actions and sleep soundly at night.